Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. I'm an architect, or at least I was. My entire life, my very identity has been built on the principles of structure, order, and integrity. I design foundations that can withstand earthquakes, load-bearing walls that carry the weight of generations, and roofs that shelter families from the storm. I believe in blueprints, in the mathematical certainty that if you follow the plan, the result will be strong, true, and enduring. I applied this philosophy to everything, not just my career. I applied it to my finances, my health, and most of all, to my marriage. My life with Alara was my masterpiece, the grand design I was most proud of. It was a structure I believed to be flawless, built on a foundation of what I thought was absolute trust. We had a 10-year plan, a meticulously crafted business strategy for our lives. It involved diversifying our investments, building a portfolio of rental properties for passive income, and maintaining a perfect credit score that would unlock any door we wanted to walk through. We were a team, a single architectural firm designing a shared future. I handled the long-term investments in real estate, leveraging my knowledge of the market to acquire undervalued properties that would become the bedrock of our financial freedom. She, with her keen eye for detail and aesthetics, managed the interior designs of these rentals, turning them into highly desirable homes that were never vacant. Our finances were completely intertwined, a single consolidated entity. It was a testament, I believed, to our unity. I saw no need for separate accounts or financial secrets. In a perfectly designed structure, every component supports the others. There are no hidden rooms, no secret passages. Everything is accounted for. The centerpiece of our design was our home, a house I didn't just buy, but conceived and built from the ground up on a cliffside overlooking the Pacific. Every line, every window, every piece of steel and glass was a symbol of our life, transparent, strong, and facing a limitless horizon. I remember standing with her on the empty plot of land years ago, the wind whipping her hair across her face as I described the vision. I told her how the morning sun would hit the kitchen, how the master bedroom would feel like it was floating over the ocean, how the foundation would be so deep it would merge with the bedrock of the cliff itself. She'd looked at me with eyes that held the same deep, endless quality as the ocean below, and she'd whispered that she trusted my vision completely. And I believed her. I poured every ounce of my creativity, my soul, and a significant portion of our capital into that house. It was more than a home. It was a statement. It was the physical manifestation of our success, our love, our perfect plan. The first few years in that house were idyllic, a perfect execution of the blueprint. Our passive income grew steadily, our investments flourished, and our life was a quiet hum of contentment and mutual respect. But structures, even the most well-designed ones, are subject to unseen pressures. Tiny, imperceptible shifts in the foundation that, over time, can lead to catastrophic failure. The first crack was so small I almost missed it. It was a phone call she took late one night. She'd walked out onto the glass balcony, her voice a low, urgent murmur that the sound of the crashing waves almost swallowed completely. When she came back inside, she said it was a friend from college going through a difficult time. I thought nothing of it. Why would I? A single hairline crack is not a structural flaw, it's a cosmetic imperfection. Then came the new laptop. She had always used the shared iMac in our home office for her work, a powerful machine capable of running any design software she needed for the rental properties. But one day, a sleek, new laptop arrived, and she became intensely private with it. She'd close it shut whenever I entered the room, and I noticed she had a piece of tape over the webcam. She told me it was for a new online course she was taking, something to expand her skill set. It was a plausible explanation, and I was proud of her ambition. Yet, a small part of my mind, the part that analyzes stress points and potential weaknesses, registered it as an anomaly. The plan did not account for this. Our lives were designed for transparency, for shared spaces and shared information. This was a locked door in a house made of glass. I started noticing other small things. An unusual charge on our joint credit card statement for a service I'd never heard of. She'd laugh it off as an impulse buy, a subscription for some online magazine she'd already counseled. I'd find her awake at 3 in the morning, the blue light of her new laptop painting her face in the darkness of our bedroom. She was working on a personal project, she'd say, something to surprise me with. The architect in me, the man who lived by logic and reason, kept trying to fit these new pieces into our existing blueprint. I rationalized everything. Her privacy was a need for autonomy. Her late nights were a sign of her creative spirit. The strange expenses were just noise in an otherwise perfect financial record. I was so convinced of the integrity of my design, so blinded by the beauty of the life we had built, that I couldn't see the truth. I couldn't see that someone was altering the blueprint. I couldn't comprehend that the woman sleeping next to me, the co-architect of my life, was secretly building something else entirely, a hidden structure within the walls of our marriage, a structure built on lies, with a foundation I couldn't see and a purpose I couldn't possibly imagine. My trust in her was the central pillar of my life, the main load-bearing wall, and I was about to find out that it was hollow. I was living in a house that was already condemned, and I, the master architect, was the last one to know. The early signs of decay were there, subtle but present, like the faint smell of mold in a damp basement or the slight warping of a floorboard. But I chose to ignore them. I polished the glass, admired the view, and believed in the perfection of my design, all while the foundations were being systematically eroded from beneath me. The real estate we owned, the passive income we generated, the very business strategy that was meant to secure our future, all of it was being leveraged for a purpose I was not privy to. I was so focused on the grand facade that I failed to inspect the plumbing, the wiring, the hidden infrastructure where the real problems always began. And as I would soon discover, the rot was deeper and more pervasive than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just a crack in the wall, it was a fundamental flaw in the very ground upon which we had built everything. My trust in her was the central pillar of my life, the main load-bearing wall, and I was about to find out that it was hollow. I was living in a house that was already condemned, and I, the master architect, was the last one to know. The early signs of decay were there, subtle but present, like the faint smell of mold in a damp basement or the slight warping of a floorboard. But I chose to ignore them. I polished the glass, admired the view, and believed in the perfection of my design, all while the foundations were being systematically eroded from beneath me. The real estate we owned, the passive income we generated, the very business strategy that was meant to secure our future, all of it was being leveraged for a purpose I was not privy to. I was so focused on the grand facade that I failed to inspect the plumbing, the wiring, the hidden infrastructure where the real problems always begin. And as I would soon discover, the rot was deeper and more pervasive than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just a crack in the wall, it was a fundamental flaw in the very ground upon which we had built everything. The hairline cracks began to spread, branching out like a spider web across the pristine surface of our life. The anomalies I had once dismissed as cosmetic imperfections were becoming undeniable signs of systemic stress. My architect's mind, trained to recognize patterns in chaos, could no longer ignore the dissonance between the blueprint I held in my head and the reality unfolding before me. The late-night whispers on the balcony became more frequent. The new laptop was now her constant companion, a silent silver barrier between us. And the financial discrepancies, once small enough to be explained away, began to grow into figures that made my stomach tighten. One evening, I was reviewing our accounts online, doing the quarterly financial check-in that was part of our shared business strategy. I believed in meticulous oversight. I saw a recurring monthly payment to a company called Shopify. I didn't recognize the name. When I asked Alara about it, she was casually dismissive, barely looking up from her laptop. She said it was for a small blog she was running, a little side project to showcase her interior design work for our rental properties. It seemed plausible, even smart, a way to attract better tenants. But the amount was higher than any blogging platform should cost. It was a business-level subscription. I let it go, but the name stuck in my mind. A few weeks later, another piece of the puzzle emerged. I was having trouble with our home Wi-Fi, and while troubleshooting the router, I looked at the list of connected devices. Her new laptop was on the list, but its location was being masked by a VPN, a virtual private network. I'm not a tech novice, I design smart homes. I know what a VPN is for. It's for privacy, for security, but it's also for hiding. It's for making your digital footprint untraceable. I confronted her, trying to keep my tone light, inquisitive. Running a VPN, worried about hackers? She gave me a practiced, easy smile. You know how it is, Alistair. You can't be too careful online, protecting our financial data. It was the perfect answer, using our shared value of security against me. And yet, it felt wrong. We already had robust security on our network. Using a VPN for simple browsing inside our own fortified home network was like wearing a bulletproof vest to go to the grocery store. It was overkill, unless you were expecting trouble. My unease was solidifying into a cold knot of suspicion. The man who trusted in transparency was now living with a woman who moved through the digital world like a ghost. The final illusion of control I had, the belief that I understood the full scope of our financial landscape, was about to be shattered. I received a notification from our credit score monitoring service. It was an alert I had set up years ago, a tripwire for any significant changes. Our score, which I had painstakingly cultivated to a near-perfect 840, had dropped. Not by much, just a few points, but it had dropped. For me, this was the equivalent of discovering a crack in a primary support beam. I delved into the report, my heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and vindication. The cause was a newly opened line of credit, a high-limit credit card I had no knowledge of. It was in her name, but it was linked to our joint finances, our shared history. Her excellent credit, built on the back of our shared success, had allowed her to open it without my signature. The balance was already nearing its limit, thousands of dollars. I looked at the transaction history. It was a dizzying list of purchases from obscure online vendors, payment processing services, and international shipping companies. It was the logistical backbone of a business, a real business. My mind started racing, connecting the dots. The Shopify subscription, the VPN for secure anonymous transactions, the new hidden line of credit to finance inventory or operating costs. This wasn't a blog. This was something else entirely. My first thought, the one that brought a bitter, acidic taste to my mouth, was that she was leaving me. That she was building a new life, a secret nest egg, preparing to cut ties and run. The thought was so painful I could barely breathe. I had designed our life to be a fortress of stability, and now it seemed she was secretly digging an escape tunnel. But even that explanation didn't feel quite right. The spending wasn't personal. There were no charges for hotels or flights or expensive gifts. It was all operational. It was the cold, impersonal spending of a logistics manager, not a lover planning a getaway. The real shock came when I stumbled upon an email she had left open on the iMac in our office. She had been careless, just for a moment. The subject line was blockchain wallet confirmation. I opened it. My understanding of cryptocurrency was architectural, not financial. I knew it as a concept, a decentralized, anonymous form of currency, a digital black box. The email contained a transaction record, a transfer of a significant amount of Bitcoin from a seller to her new wallet. The amount was staggering. It was more than the down payment on our first rental property. I stood there in the silent, minimalist office I had designed, surrounded by the evidence of my own ignorance. Shopify, VPN, credit card debt, blockchain wallet. These were the components of a structure I didn't recognize, a hidden architecture operating in the shadows of my own creation. She wasn't just my wife. She was a business owner. A secret entrepreneur operating a clandestine enterprise right under my roof. And she was using our shared financial foundation, the very foundation I had so carefully built and protected, to fund it. The sense of betrayal was profound. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the utter violation of our core principle, transparency. Our partnership, our entire life's business strategy, was built on a lie. She had walled off a part of her life so completely that I hadn't even known it existed. The man who prided himself on seeing every angle, on understanding every joint and stress point, had been blind to the massive, unauthorized extension being built onto his own life. I felt like a fool. My meticulously crafted blueprint was a joke. While I was busy admiring the view from our glass house, she was in the basement running a covert operation. The perfect credit score, the passive income from our real estate, the solid investments, I had seen them as the pillars of our shared future. To her, it seemed, they were just a source of startup capital, a convenient line of credit for an agenda she had never shared with me. The fear of her leaving was replaced by a different, more chilling fear. Who was this woman I had married? What was she building in the dark? And as I stood there, the confirmation of her blockchain while it glowing on the screen, I knew I had to find out. I was no longer just the architect of our home. I had to become an archaeologist, digging through the layers of deception to uncover the truth, no matter how much it might damage the foundations of everything I held dear. The decision to investigate was like deciding to take a sledgehammer to my own masterpiece. I knew that once I started swinging, the beautiful, fragile glass walls of my life would shatter, and I wouldn't be able to piece them back together. But the alternative, to live within a structure I knew was compromised, to pretend the spreading cracks weren't there, was unthinkable for a man like me. My obsession with integrity wouldn't allow it. I needed to see the real blueprint, the one she had hidden from me. My first step was to move from suspicion to surveillance. I was an architect, not a spy, but my profession had taught me about systems, about how different parts connect and communicate. Our home was a smart home, a network I had designed myself. Every light, every speaker, every byte of data flowed through a central hub that I controlled. It was a violation of the trust I thought we still had, a deep and bitter betrayal in its own right, but I justified it as a necessary evil. I was performing a structural analysis on my own marriage. I installed a keylogger on the shared iMac and set up a packet sniffer on our network, routing her laptop's traffic through a monitoring port before it hit the VPN. For 3 days, I watched. I didn't work, I barely ate. I sat in my glass-walled office, looking out at the serene, indifferent ocean, while a torrent of damning information flooded my screen. The truth was far uglier and more complex than a simple secret business or a plan to leave me. Ilara, my elegant, art-loving wife, was the architect of a massive and highly illegal dropshipping empire. The Shopify store wasn't a blog, it was the storefront for a sophisticated operation selling counterfeit luxury goods. High-end handbags, designer watches, premium sneakers, all of them convincing fakes sourced from overseas suppliers. The business strategy was a twisted mockery of my own. She had taken my principles of efficiency, market analysis, and leveraged assets and applied them to a world of crime. She used social media marketing with chilling precision, targeting insecure buyers with promises of luxury at a fraction of the price. The hidden credit cards were used to pay for a network of freelance marketers and a bewildering array of software subscriptions designed to automate the business. The VPN was used to mask her IP address, communicating with suppliers in countries where intellectual property laws were a joke. The scale of it was breathtaking. She was processing hundreds of orders a day. The money, once it hit her payment processors, was immediately funneled through a series of shell accounts and then converted into sex accounts and then converted into cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero, and deposited into the blockchain wallet I had discovered. It was a digital money laundering scheme of incredible sophistication. She was washing the profits from her illegal enterprise, turning dirty digital cash into clean, untraceable crypto assets. The architect in me, the part that admired complex systems, felt a flicker of horrified awe before being consumed by disgust. The betrayal was absolute. It was a dagger in the heart of everything I believed in. I had built a life on a foundation of genuine value, on creating real, tangible assets like our real estate portfolio, which provided people with homes. Our passive income was earned honestly. She, on the other hand, had built her empire on deceit, on selling lies to people who wanted to project an image of wealth. Our worlds weren't just different, they were diametrically opposed. She was the photographic negative of me. I scrolled through customer complaints forwarded to a hidden email address. People who had been scammed, whose fake bags were falling apart after a week, whose credit card information had been stolen. She had no remorse. Her internal notes were cold, clinical, focused only on mitigating financial risk and avoiding chargebacks. There was no empathy, only calculation. This was the woman I shared a bed with. This was the woman whose head I had watched rest on the pillow beside me while she was dreaming of profit margins on fake watches. The sense of failure was suffocating. How could I, a man who analyzes every detail, who could spot a miscalculation of a millimeter on a blueprint, have been so completely blind? I had seen her as my partner, my equal. But in her secret world, I was just a resource. My excellent credit score wasn't a symbol of our shared discipline, it was a tool for her to leverage. My business acumen, the strategies I'd proudly shared with her over dinner, were nothing more than a free consultation for her criminal enterprise. The love and trust I had given her were the foundation for her lies. I felt a cold, hollowing emptiness. The man in the mirror was a stranger, a dupe, the cuckolded husband in a financial, not a sexual sense. The final piece of evidence, the one that broke me completely, was a file I found buried deep in her laptop's hard drive. It was a business plan. Her business plan. In it, she detailed her 5-year strategy. It included scaling the dropshipping operation, then using the laundered crypto profits to make a series of high-risk, high-reward investments, and finally, diversifying into legitimate businesses. The end game was to build an empire so large and so clean that its origins would be forgotten. And there, on page 5, was the exit strategy. It was titled Asset Separation. It detailed a plan to legally shield her assets from me in the event of a divorce, using the pretense of an amicable separation to ensure I didn't dig too deep into the finances she would claim were from shrewd personal investments. She had been planning to leave me all along, not for another person, but for another life, a life built on a mountain of cash and deceit. My love, our home, our marriage, it was all just phase 1 of her business plan. I was her angel investor, and she was planning to dilute my shares to 0 and kick me out of the company. I closed the laptop. The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by the distant crash of the waves. I looked around at the clean lines, the open spaces, the floor-to-ceiling windows. The house I had designed to be a symbol of transparency and truth felt like a prison, a meticulously constructed stage for a play in which I was the only one who didn't know his lines. The failure wasn't structural, it was foundational. The very ground beneath us was a lie, and I, the architect, had to face the fact that my masterpiece was built on quicksand. The confrontation was no longer a choice, it was an inevitability. I had the blueprint of her deceit in my hands, and I was about to bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. The confrontation didn't happen with a roar, but with a quiet, deadly calm. I waited until she was on the balcony that evening, silhouetted against the indigo sky, her laptop open on the table in front of her. The architect in me chose the setting with deliberate, cruel irony. I walked out and didn't say a word. I just placed my own laptop on the table next to hers and turned the screen so she could see it. On it was the network traffic analysis, a cascading waterfall of data packets flowing from her suppliers to her Shopify dashboard. Next to it, I have the blockchain wallet transaction history open, and next to that, her 5-year business plan with the asset separation section highlighted in red. The color drained from her face. The mask of serene contentment she wore so effortlessly dissolved, replaced by a flicker of pure animal panic. Then, something harder, colder. She didn't deny it. There was no point. The evidence was as solid as the concrete foundation beneath our feet. Her first words were not an apology. They were a question. How long have you known? It was a question of logistics, of risk assessment, not of love, not of betrayal. In that moment, the woman I loved vanished completely, replaced by the ruthless CEO I had been reading about for the past 72 hours. And then she began to talk. It wasn't a confession filled with regret. It was a justification, a business presentation. She spoke of the debts she had from before we met, a crushing weight she had never told me about. She spoke of feeling suffocated by my meticulous plans, by the life I had designed for us, a life where she felt like a feature, not a co-architect. She saw my stability not as a gift, but as a cage. The dropshipping empire was her rebellion, her way of seizing control, of building something that was truly hers. She described her actions with a chilling detachment, as if she were discussing a corporate takeover. She admitted to using my financial strategies, my perfect credit score, our shared assets, the real estate, the rental income, as collateral and seed money. To her, it wasn't theft, it was leverage, an unsecured business loan from a very gullible investor. I listened, my heart turning to stone. Every word she spoke was a demolition charge, blasting away another piece of our shared history. The love, the laughter, the promises, all of it recontextualized as part of her long con. The demolition of our marriage was swift, but the demolition of my life was just beginning. Within a week, the letters started to arrive. Cease and desist notices from the luxury brands whose products she was counterfeiting. Then came the letter from the bank, freezing our joint accounts due to suspicious activity. The passive income from our rental properties, the money that was supposed to be our safety net, was instantly choked off. But the real bomb landed a few days later. It was a formal inquiry from the IRS, flagging the massive undeclared income and the complex web of transactions. And then the knockout blow, a letter from the Department of Justice. A federal investigation was being opened into wire fraud, money laundering, and trafficking in counterfeit goods. And because my name was on the joint accounts, on the deeds to the properties whose income was used as collateral, on the tax returns that were now fraudulent, my name was right next to hers on the investigation notice. My meticulously designed life, my fortress of financial security, came crashing down. The failure was total. I was facing bankruptcy. Worse, I was facing prison time. The irony was almost too much to bear. I, Alistair, the man who paid his taxes to the penny, who believed in rules and regulations, who saw beauty in the rigid logic of the building code, was now implicated as a co-conspirator in a federal crime. I hired a lawyer, a man with a grim face and an hourly rate that made my head spin. He laid out the brutal reality. Separating myself from her crimes would be a legal nightmare. The prosecution would see us as a single entity. My claims of ignorance would sound, at best, naive, and at worst, like a pathetic attempt to feign innocence. The dream house, my architectural triumph, was no longer a home. It was Exhibit A. Its construction, our lifestyle, it would all be used by the prosecution as evidence of the profits from our supposed joint criminal enterprise. We had to sell it, immediately, to cover the legal fees and the coming fines. The process of putting it on the market was a special kind of hell. Realtors, potential buyers, inspectors, they all walked through the spaces I had so lovingly created, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls of my life. They saw a beautiful house. I saw a crime scene. Ilara was gone. She had her own legal team, funded by the very crypto assets she had hidden away. Her strategy, my lawyer grimly informed me, would likely be to paint me as either the mastermind or, at the very least, a willing and active participant. It was her only play. To save herself, she had to sacrifice me. The business strategy she had outlined in her plan was now playing out in the real world, and I was being asset separated from my own life, my own freedom. The days became a blur of legal consultations, financial audits, and sleepless nights. The weight of the debt was a physical presence, a crushing force on my chest. Every morning I would wake up and for a single blissful second, I would forget. And then the reality would come crashing back in, the full scope of the demolition. I had lost my wife, my home, my savings, my reputation, and potentially my liberty. My entire life's work, every plan I had ever made, had resulted in this, a catastrophic, system-wide failure. I would walk through the empty rooms of the house, running my hand along the cool steel beams, looking out at the endless, mocking ocean. I had been so proud of this structure. I believed it was perfect. But I had forgotten the most important rule of architecture. A building is only as strong as its occupants. And I had shared my masterpiece with a saboteur. Hitting rock bottom is a surprisingly quiet experience. There's no final dramatic crash. It's more like a slow, silent descent until you realize you're surrounded by rubble and there's nowhere left to fall. For me, that moment came on the day I handed the keys of my dream house to a stranger. The sale had been a fire sale, a desperate move to liquidate our largest asset before it was seized. After paying the initial mountain of legal fees, the remaining equity, which was supposed to be the cornerstone of our retirement, evaporated into an escrow account, frozen pending the outcome of the federal case. I walked away from that house with a single suitcase and the clothes on my back. My name, once a mark of architectural prestige, was now toxic, inextricably linked to an ongoing criminal investigation. My firm let me go, citing a morals clause in my contract. I couldn't blame them. Who wants a potential felon designing their family home? I was professionally homeless. I ended up in a small, soul-crushing apartment in a part of the city I used to drive through with my windows up. The rent was paid with what little I had left in a personal account Ilara hadn't been able to touch. The contrast between my old life and this new one was a form of daily psychological torture. I went from a glass house overlooking the ocean to a box with a single window that faced a brick wall. The silence in that apartment was a living thing. It was filled with the ghosts of my own stupidity. I spent weeks replaying every moment of my life with Ilara, every conversation, every shared smile. I was no longer an architect. I was a forensic accountant of my own heart, sifting through the emotional wreckage, trying to pinpoint the exact moment the lies began. Was it from the very start? Was our entire relationship, our marriage, just a long-term business strategy for her? The regret was a physical ache, a constant, dull throb behind my eyes. It wasn't just regret for trusting her, it was regret for my own arrogance. My belief in my own perception, in my infallible blueprints, had been my undoing. I had been so in love with the image of the perfect life I was building that I had failed to see the person I was building it with. I was forced to confront the wreckage of my finances. My lawyer had advised me to declare bankruptcy, a word that was anathema to me. My perfect credit score was a distant memory, now a cratered landscape of defaults and legal judgments. The passive income from our rental properties was gone, seized by the government. The properties themselves would likely be next. I had to sell my car. I took on freelance drafting work, small, anonymous jobs for other architects, paying just enough to keep the lights on. It was a humbling, gut-wrenching fall from grace. Designing award-winning homes had been replaced by drawing up plans for bathroom renovations and garage extensions. The work was mechanical, devoid of the passion I once had. The man who built monuments to transparency was now hiding behind a computer screen, his name removed from the title blocks. My survival became my only business strategy. There were no 5-year plans, no investment portfolios. There was only the next meal, the next rent payment, the next legal bill. My world had shrunk from an infinite horizon to the 4 walls of my tiny apartment. I had to untangle every financial thread that connected me to Ilara. This meant endless paperwork, meetings with forensic accountants, and providing evidence against the woman I once promised to love and protect. Each signed affidavit felt like a betrayal of a memory, even a false one. I had to prove my own innocence by detailing her guilt, by handing the prosecution the very blueprints of her deceit that I had uncovered. It was a slow, painful process of amputating a part of myself. During this time, I began to see a different kind of architecture, the architecture of survival. It wasn't about steel and glass, it was about resilience. It was about finding a single, solid point in the wreckage to build from again. For me, that point was the truth. As painful as it was, the truth was the only foundation I had left. I stopped seeing myself as a victim of her scheme and started seeing myself as a survivor of a catastrophic event. I began to realize that my obsession with planning and control had been a weakness, not a strength. It had made me rigid, unable to see the unexpected, the human element that can't be accounted for in a blueprint. I had tried to build a life that was perfect, sterile, and predictable. But life, like any real structure, has to be able to bend. It has to withstand storms, not just by being strong, but by being flexible. Mine had been too rigid, and it had shattered. The anger and the regret began to slowly, very slowly recede, replaced by a quiet, grim determination. I would not let her be the final architect of my life. She had designed my destruction, but I would design my own reconstruction. It wouldn't be grand or beautiful, not at first. It would be small, functional, and built with the salvaged materials of my own failure. It would be a shelter, not a palace. And it would be built on the one thing she could never take from me, the knowledge that I had, at my core, acted with integrity. I was broke. I was disgraced. I was facing a legal battle that could end with me in a prison cell. But as I sat in that cheap apartment, sketching out a plan for my legal defense on a napkin, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was the first inkling of a new design. The legal battle was a 2-year-long war of attrition. It was a grueling process of depositions, discovery, and living with the constant grind and stress of an unknown future. My legal team, funded by the last of my liquidated assets and a loan from my parents I swore I would repay, worked tirelessly to prove I was a victim, not a participant. They used my own meticulous financial records, my decade-long history of fiscal prudence, as a baseline to contrast with the sudden, chaotic explosion of secret debt and money laundering Ilera had initiated. They painted a picture of a man deceived, a man so focused on the grand design of his life that he missed the rot in the foundations. Ilera's defense was exactly what my lawyer had predicted. She and her team tried to portray me as the disgruntled, controlling husband, the true mastermind who was now trying to pin his crimes on her. But her story began to unravel under scrutiny. The complex web of lies she had woven was too intricate, too full of contradictions. The digital trail I had uncovered was undeniable. The blockchain transactions, the communications with counterfeit suppliers, the detailed business plan, it all pointed to her as the sole architect of the enterprise. In the end, the prosecution offered me a deal. In exchange for my full testimony against her, they would drop the most serious charges against me. I would still have to plead guilty to a lesser charge of criminal negligence, acknowledging that I should have known what was happening under my own roof and with my own finances. It was a bitter pill to swallow. My pride screamed against admitting any fault. But the architect in me, the pragmatist, saw it as the only viable path forward. It meant avoiding prison time. It meant a chance to rebuild. My testimony was the final act of our marriage. Seeing her in court was like looking at a stranger. The woman across the room, in a tailored suit, her face a mask of detached composure, bore no resemblance to the woman I had loved, the woman whose hair I had held back when she was sick, the woman I had designed a home for. I laid out the facts, calmly and methodically, presenting the blueprint of her betrayal to the jury. I didn't speak with anger, but with the quiet, devastating clarity of absolute truth. She was found guilty on multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. She was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. My sentence was probation, a hefty fine that would follow me for years, and community service. The day the verdict came down, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt empty. The war was over, and the landscape was scorched earth. But it was over. I was free. The years that followed were about reconstruction. I couldn't go back to being the architect I was before. My name was cleared of the worst of the charges, but the taint of the scandal remained. No high-end firm would touch me, so I started over. I got a job with a nonprofit organization that builds affordable housing. The pay was a fraction of what I used to make, but the work had a substance and integrity that my glass palaces never did. I wasn't designing monuments to wealth anymore. I was designing functional, safe, and dignified homes for people who had nothing. I found a new kind of beauty in a well-designed two-bedroom apartment for a single mother. A beauty that was more profound than any infinity pool overlooking the ocean. I learned to live with less. I discovered that my identity wasn't tied to my net worth or my credit score. The debt from the fines and legal fees is still with me, a constant reminder of the past. But it's no longer a crushing weight. It's just a part of my new blueprint, a known variable that I have to design around. I never heard from Alara again. Sometimes I wonder if she feels any remorse, but I suspect she only regrets getting caught. I have come to see that her entire philosophy was built on a flawed premise, that a life's value can be measured in dollars and cents, that success is about accumulation. My own philosophy had been flawed too. I believed that a perfect life could be designed and built, that risk could be eliminated through planning. I was wrong. Life isn't a blueprint. It's a living structure, constantly shifting and settling. It requires maintenance, attention to the small cracks, and the humility to know that you can never be fully in control. The most important foundations aren't made of concrete. They are made of trust, honesty, and the courage to face the truth, especially when it's ugly. My new life isn't the grand design I once envisioned. It's smaller, simpler, and scarred by my past failures. But it's real. And for the first time in a very long time, it's a structure I can trust. Because I built it from the bedrock up, with my own two hands, on a foundation of hard-won truth. Thank you for tuning in to Reddit Whispers. We've all faced moments when everything felt broken. What was your turning point? Leave it in the comments, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. I thank you for tuning in to Reddit Whispers. We've all faced moments when everything felt broken. What was your turning point? Leave it in the comments, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now.